Who's the best athlete that you've covered in your time at the Pantagraph from this area?
From this area?
Any sport, doesn't matter. Best overall athlete.
I think it might have been
Randy Kindred, thank you very much for coming on to the show today. I appreciate your time very much.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
So, before we dive right in, could you tell the listeners just a little bit about who it is you are and what it is you do and have done?
Okay. Well, I grew up just 20 miles south of Bloomington in Atlanta, a small town, about 1,800 people. And growing up, I think I was like a lot of kids are. You think you're going to be a pro athlete. And I got a little older and I realized I wasn't going to be. But throughout school, I loved to write. And so I just kind of combined my two loves of sports and writing. And I figured that's going to be a good way to make a living. And it's been tremendous. I spent 42 years at the Pantagraph full-time and retired as sports editor in March of 2020. But since that time, I've been writing 2 columns per week for the sports section still. So I still have a connection there and a presence there. And that's been nice to kind of continue that because the writing part is what I've loved for all these years. So it's been great for me. And I'm glad that I grew up on a farm. My dad was a farmer. My brother was a farmer, but that just wasn't for me. So I'm glad I ended up in a profession that really motivated me and fulfilled me like this one has.
Mm-hmm. And when you walked into my place, first thing I realized is you're a big guy. You're a tall guy. You probably were a pretty good athlete, I would imagine.
Well, I had good size, but I didn't have much speed and quickness, so that worked against me in those. I played basketball for 2 years. I went to Olympia High School, played for 2 years, and then I played baseball for 4 years. So and even though basketball was and still is kind of my first love, I just wasn't quick enough and fast enough to really play it. If they boiled basketball down to a game of horse, I could have played for quite a while because I could shoot, but I couldn't do much else. So that's kind of what led me into writing about people who can do those things.
I got it. Now, are you like me at all? I absolutely love, when it comes to sports, I don't know the first thing about basketball, really. I'm a lifelong wrestler, but I still can appreciate kind of the drama, the theatrics, the stories in sports and in basketball. I mean, I'm a big fan of Michael Jordan. I loved that docu-series, The Last Dance.
Yeah.
Are you like me in that way? Why do you love writing about sports?
Well, I absolutely loved that documentary that they did, and I think what's drawn me to it, and I've told people this for years, I think I don't really necessarily write about sports. I write about the people in sports. I just love the human element of it, and like you said, there's a lot of drama. There's the way I kind of think of it is when I see, like back in the day, if I saw Michael Jordan at the foul line late in the game, less than 10 seconds left to try to win the game, I don't know what that's like per se, but I know what it's like to feel nervous or to feel anxiety or to try to overcome being nervous or that kind of thing. So I think even if you're not a top flight athlete, if I can portray kind of what they're going through, then people reading it can think, well, I can connect with that because I've felt those emotions myself. So that's kind of what has always driven me to do this job is I love finding out what makes people tick and why they're able to overcome some things that other people's aren't able to, and so it's that human element that really has been the greatest thing for me.
Are you interested in the field of psychology at all?
I a little bit. I don't know if I could delve into it a whole lot, but that is kind of that's such a big part of sports and being an athlete is having the right mindset and being able to put aside distractions and those kind of things. And so, I think maybe if I hadn't been a sports writer, maybe I would have gone into into some kind of field like that.
So tell me more about when did you exactly find out that you weren't cut out to be a pro athlete?
Well, I kind of kidded myself throughout junior high because and I was in Atlanta at junior high and I could pretty much play whatever sport I wanted, but then when I got to Olympia, I went from a junior high that's really small to a high school that at that time had 1,000 students. So it was a big jump. And when I got there, I realized that there were a lot of people who were just as good as me and probably better, especially in basketball. So probably the defining moments were, one, when I was a sophomore, I was a pitcher in baseball coming up through junior high. And my freshman year at Olympia, I had a no-hitter against U-High, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. Well, then that was in a freshman game. But then when I got to my sophomore year, I hadn't really not developed a curveball or a changeup or anything. I just tried to throw it by everybody, and I got to a point where I couldn't do that anymore. I wasn't bigger and stronger than the guys that were going against me. So that was an eye opener. That turned me into a first baseman and a catcher, and which I ended up playing 2 more years of varsity ball after that. And in basketball, it was my junior year. Went out for the team and got cut as a junior for the varsity, and so that was when it really hit home. It's like, I'm not going to do any of this beyond high school. I need to incorporate my love for writing and love for sports and really focus in on that. And then so at Olympia, we had a school newspaper, so I joined the school newspaper. My senior year, I was sports editor of the school newspaper, so that kind of led me into and then I went to Illinois State and studied journalism and got a job at the Pantagraph part-time while I was at ISU, and it turned into a full-time job, and here we are.
Man, wow. It's impressive. Usually when kids go to college, they'll change their majors a few times at least, but it seems like you knew what you wanted to do from early in high school, and you just stuck with it your whole life. How did you find out that was something that you were that passionate about? How were you so sure?
Well, I think it was not only that it just kind of felt right, but also Atlanta is a very small town, but there's another sports writer, Dave Kindred, who's, even though he's a kindred, he's not really closely related to me, but he is a nationally known sports writer and author and has won the Red Smith Award, which is the top award for a sports writer nationally. He's big time, and even though he's 17 years older than I am, I think. But growing up, I would occasionally read stuff that he had written for the Washington Post and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and different publications, and he was just terrific. And so that motivated me too I had identified sports writing as something I thought I wanted to do, and then when I saw what he had done with it, it just reinforced that, this is what I want to do. And I wrote a column a few years ago about how over the years, a lot of times I've been places and people have thought that Dave was my dad or my uncle or my brother, early on I would say, no, we're from the same small town, but we're not closely related. And by the end, I'd almost come to the fact that if they said, I see your dad wrote a column about this and this, I'd just say, it was pretty good, wasn't it? But he was a big influence, and he's actually back in the area now and lives near Carlock, and so I see him occasionally now, and he's a great guy who never let his success go to his head, so he's still that guy from Atlanta, which is kind of nice.
You said not closely related. What does that mean, like second cousins or something?
Well, as I described it in the column I wrote about him, if we're related, it would require research to find out how far down the line it goes. So I see. There's just, even though it's such a small town, there's apparently 2 strains of kindreds that came up, and I would guess... boy, I've not researched it enough to know, but probably maybe fifth or sixth cousins. I don't know down the line, but
Okay.
as my mom used to refer to a relation like that, shirt tail cousin. So
Right.
that might be what we are. But he's almost felt like a relative just because he's been so open, and any time I've ever wanted to contact him, I've been able to talk to him, and he's given me good advice, and so it kind of feels like we're related even though we're not.
Yeah. Valentine's Day is coming up, and you do not want to be the person that doesn't get your special someone a beautiful bouquet of flowers. The gift of flowers has long been a way of expressing your love and admiration for your significant other on this centuries-old holiday. However, if you attempt to go out and find your own flowers, arrange them nicely, and get them to your person on time, you can go wrong in so many different ways. Lucky for you, Nature's Designs by Tiff in Fairbury is taking all of the stress out of the holiday this year so that you can fully enjoy it with the person you love. Just call them up at 815-692-3024 and tell them that you'd like some flowers to be delivered to your loved one's address on Valentine's Day. You can even ask that they deliver it in the morning or in the afternoon, and they can include chocolates, stuffed animals, candles, bath products, plants, and other cute gift items to really put a smile on your loved one's face. So don't delay. Call up Nature's Designs by Tiff at 815-692-3024 and schedule your incredible Valentine's Day delivery package and make this Valentine's Day the best one yet. Yeah, man, what a good guy. Everyone needs him. A lot of the most successful people that I know had mentors of some sort, and it seems like this guy was that for you.
Yeah, he has been, and it's a lot to, I figured out long ago that I'm probably not going to live up to what he's done because he's, he worked at the Pantagraph during his college days, but then he went to the Louisville paper and kind of became the Louisville reporter on Muhammad Ali, who was Cassius Clay back in those days. Very young. He had just, won the Olympics in 1960, I believe it was, and had come back. And so Dave became kind of the beat writer for Louisville on Muhammad Ali, and he covered all of his huge fights, and it was just an amazing career that Dave carved out for himself. And he's if you ever have a chance to read anything he writes, it's terrific.
Yeah, it also seems like he was in the right place at the right time, though, going to Louisville when Muhammad Ali was just coming up. Like, that's an incredible thing to be covering.
Yeah, and he took a chance when he left the Pantagraph to go there because he got hired as a copy editor at the Louisville paper. But he kept telling him, if you need anything you need something covered or this or that, or he would go out. He worked at night, I think, so he'd go out during the day and he would find stories and he would write these things and show it to them, and they were just blown away. They're like, "Oh, well, we need to be using this guy as a writer and not as a copy editor," And so he really carved out, and then that led to his opportunity. I think, as he tells it, an editor one day came over and said, "Clay is back in town. Go find him." That was the first time that Dave went out and he tracked down Cassius Clay, and they hit it off immediately. And all those years that he covered him, he said that Muhammad Ali would always just refer to him as Louisville because he knew he was the Louisville guy that always covered him. So even though Dave went to different papers, he always said, "Hey, Louisville, come here," So they had a great connection.
No, you said you urge us to go read some of the things that this guy wrote. What makes an article even good, in your opinion? Like, we're all using the same, well, maybe we're not using the same words. How do you make something like that good?
Well, I think a big thing, obviously, is to have a big vocabulary, which I feel like my teachers in grade school, high school, college, they helped me develop that. Dave has a much wider one than I do even, and but I don't know. It's just a good story. I think kind of flows along. It's like you're in a car and you're just cruising down the highway, and you don't have to stop for anything, or one paragraph kind of leads into the other, and there's a flow to it and a rhythm, and it's you don't want a story that's going to be like you're in city traffic where you go a block and you have to stop, and then you go the next paragraph and you have to stop. And the best stories, you might read a story that's, let's say it's 40 inches long in newsprint, but it felt like it was 10 inches because you just breezed right. It kept your interest, and you were able to just keep kind of go along for the ride. And so that's one thing Dave told me a long time ago, is he always tries to have every paragraph relate to the paragraph before it or the paragraph after it. So there's something there that connects it all. And so that's one piece of his advice that I've always tried to read. And so I'll write, as I'm writing a column, I might be halfway through it, and I'll just stop and I'll go back, and to myself, I won't read it aloud, but to myself, I'll read it back to myself and see if it's got the flow that I want. And if not, I might tweak a few things. And then, so every once in a while during the process, I'll do that. And then when I get to the end, I'll read the whole thing to myself and see if it flows. And so that's the biggest thing in creating a good story, I think, is including as many descriptive elements as you can, and then making it all flow so the reader just feels like it's easy and it's smooth.
Mm-hmm. It's art. You can't spin it any other way. It's art. You're illustrating with your vocabulary in fine detail this beautiful picture. And then you're making sure the picture is beautiful to look at by the flow of the story that you're writing. And it's so interesting hearing you articulate this, because I've never heard it articulated like this before, because I'm reading a book, or I just finished a book that was written by a neuroscientist. Mm-hmm. He's not exactly an author like yourself, but I noticed he would be telling a really captivating story about one of his patients, and then, right at the good part, he'd stop and then talk about this illness itself, and then a different story. I'm like, hey, I wanted to...
want to finish that one.
Yeah, what are you doing? Whereas I'm rereading a book now by Walter Isaacson, who wrote biographies on Ben Franklin, and in this book, Steve Jobs. And it's incredible because I notice, one, the vocabulary is incredible. I have to ask Siri what this word means every once in a while, and it turns out to be the perfect word.
Yeah.
But also, there's no good place to stop. I think the one paragraph has something to do with the next and the one before it. There's no good place to stop. It just keeps you in, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. And I like when I would write a game story for the paper, cover a game, and then write. You always wanted to make it difficult for when they're putting a page together, if they're getting tight on space, make it difficult for them to cut it. You make it so
genius.
So they're. If they cut it, they're going to leave the reader hanging in some way, and that way they figure out a way to not cut it. So that was just most of the time that worked. Sometimes it didn't. It just came down to they didn't have space for everything. But and another key to a good story or a column or whatever is the interview that leads to it, or interviews. You have to be. I think almost as important as being a good writer is being a good interviewer and a good listener. Listening is because I've been to millions of press conferences where somebody will come in and they've got a sheet and they've got like 5 or 10 questions written that, by golly, I'm going to ask these questions no matter what. Well, then they won't even be really listening to the press conference, because 15 minutes into it, they might ask something that's already been asked and answered, but it's on their list. They're not even really. Whereas I think most of them I go into, I have a general idea of where I want the interview to start, but then I just listen to their responses, and that leads me to my next question, because people are going to be a lot more open if they're talking about if the interview is going in the direction of things that are important to them and they're interested in, rather than what I'm guessing they might want it to go. I don't want to steer them somewhere where they're not necessarily. I mean, the only danger is sometimes if you give them too much latitude, then they'll go off on a tangent. You got to kind of pull them back to what you initially want to talk about. But so that's another key aspect of good writing, is being a good listener.
And just shutting up and letting them talk.
I mean, sometimes it's as simple as that. Yeah, short questions and long answers. I just throw out something and then let them talk, and they might. I know one thing was Josh Brent, who was a 3-sport athlete at Central Catholic back in 2007, would have been his senior year.
Fairbury Furniture is Central Illinois' premier furniture store. This family-owned business offers a vast selection of premium furniture items from all of your favorite brands, including Sealy, Best Home Furnishings, Leather Italia, Tempur-Pedic, and Ashley, just to name a few. And right next door to their gorgeous 7,000-square-foot furniture showroom, you will find the Fairbury Furniture Mattress Store, home to all of the latest and greatest mattresses in any and all sizes. Here at Fairbury Furniture, their staff is helpful and friendly, and they are well stocked with all the mattresses, tables, chairs, recliners, couches, rugs, and decorative pillows that your heart could desire. So make your home interior beautiful, comfortable, stylish, and delightful when you shop at Fairbury's own Fairbury Furniture.
Josh Brent, who was a 3-sport athlete at Central Catholic back in 2007, would have been his senior year. He was our athlete of the year at the Pantagraph, so I went out to do a story on him. He had committed to Illinois for football, and as we sat down in the foyer at Central Catholic, and as we're beginning to talk, he starts talking about how his senior year, his mother had been ill and she had moved to Waukegan. He was basically homeless at one point, and a teammate and his father took him in, and so that's where the whole story went. It wasn't, initially when I went into it, I thought, well, we'll talk about what he's done athletically, which obviously I touched on that and everything, but the story turned out to be the journey that he had been on just to stay in school and have some sort of a life outside of athletics. And I mean, he's had a lot of bumps in the road since then. He went to the Cowboys and played there for a while, but then was driving and in an accident that killed one of his teammates. And he's done a lot of things that I'm sure he regrets. But at that time, back then, it was amazing to hear. And even when he was in junior high, his mother would work. She was working all the time. He was left to his own devices a lot of times. And he said, I had to really. There were times that I kind of veered off and was in danger of really getting in some bad trouble. And then somehow he kept it on the right path. But that was an example of just the interview went where after I started the ball rolling, he kind of took it from there, and I'm glad it went the way that it did. It was a much better story than the one I had envisioned in my mind.
Right, yeah. And you think about it, that was probably one of the first times that his darker story had ever surfaced, and it comes into play when you read the stories, his more modern stories, getting in that accident and everything with the Cowboys, and it gives you an insight, and that insight came from, the story that you did on him. It's fascinating. It gave a psychological insight to what this guy went through. Yeah,
I think, I walked away from that interview I had a much greater appreciation for what he had gone through, and I think part of him felt good to actually talk about it and tell somebody about it, and I guess that's the benefit of being somewhere for a long time like I was. By that time that I interviewed him, I had interviewed him many, many times before that. He had a trust level in me and kind of felt like he knew me, I think, and so that always helps too when there's. I mean, obviously, you never want to be buddy with a coach or an athlete or anything. You have to be impartial when you're covering the games and stuff. But if you build up trust with them, they're much more apt to tell you what's in their heart. And really what's in their heart is what people love to read about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because you said it's almost therapeutic for him, or it might have been therapeutic for him to tell you that story. I've had that exact same feedback from a few of my guests on this show. You know, if you just hold on to your story, especially the more difficult journeys, you're bearing the weight of an untold story. It helps a lot to get that weight off of you. Yeah. And then when that story's out there for, thousands of people to read or listen to, you get all this positive feedback. And it's really a great thing, I think. I
had one of those just this past week. Nate Ropp had been a star basketball player at Fieldcrest. I think he graduated 2010. And I had seen recently on Facebook, he put out there that he was celebrating the fact that he had reached 1 year of sobriety, and I didn't know that he had been battling anything, and so I got a hold of his cell number from someone else, and I just texted him, and he knew me from back when I covered him, and I said, "Congratulations on reaching a year. Would you?" Be willing to talk about that. I think it might help other people and so he did, and he was incredibly open about everything that happened, and it was alcohol and it just became a tremendous story just because he was so open about telling them just opening up the world to say, here's how far I fell, he contacted. It was in Sunday's paper, and he contacted me and said that he had just been overwhelmed with all the support. He'd had a lot of support anyway from people who, on the inside, who knew what he was going through, but just all kinds of people had given him support after they read and they commended him for having the courage to talk about it, and so that was a recent example of somebody kind of getting something off their chest, getting it out there, and then I imagine he feels much better now than he did a week ago.
Right. And just like we've been saying this whole time, it seems like a lot of good things were going on in that conversation, in that article alone, because you probably also wrote the article in a way that allowed people reading it to relate to it and to step into his shoes a little more, to have a more personal connection with what he was saying. So they related more. And then also, I mean, he's probably saying things that a lot of people are too nervous or embarrassed to say.
Yeah.
So he's showing them that a guy like him, you can come back.
Yeah.
And just like I said, a whole lot of things going right, and you're doing the story for the right reasons. You're not shaming anyone. You're making a positive article. So I commend you for that, and I commend Mr. Ropp for that as well.
And I. Right from the get-go, when I text him, and I mean, if he'd had any reservations at all, I would have said, well, I don't want to do it until you're 100% ready to do it. But he was ready, and one thing that he talked about was a couple of times when he fell back into the dark times was he thought, well, I'll go to this and I'll just drink beer, and that if I just do that, I'll be fine. I'm thinking there's probably a lot of people out there who have told themselves the same thing, and then it goes from, and in his case, it always went from a few beers, and then as he said, the hard stuff, he would get into drinking whiskey, and just it would go off the rails from there. So there were a lot of things he talked about that I'm sure people out there were like, yeah. He's got a point there. Maybe.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I should learn from this.
Yeah. I mean, we've all read things like that make us go, "Whoa."
Yeah.
That's he's talking right to me there.
Yeah.
So how exactly? We're talking about your journey here. How did you wind up at the Pantagraph? You briefly touched on that, but tell me a little bit more.
Okay. My sophomore year at ISU, I had a reporting class, and the professor was actually a former news editor at the Pantagraph. His name was Dick Streckfuss, and just a terrific guy and a great teacher. And we wrote he gave us a few assignments, and we wrote them early in the semester. And one day he called me up after class, and he said, the stuff you've turned in is professional quality already. And I was like, oh, wow. And he said, would you be interested in, or what are you interested in writing about? And I said, well, sports is kind of where I'd like to end up. He contacted the sports editor at the time, Jim Barnhart, at the Pantagraph, and shortly thereafter, I got hired part-time, just working weekend Sundays and Monday nights, putting the pages together. It was nothing glamorous, but it was a way to get the foot in the door. And then that led to Jim would assign me a game or two each week, to go out and cover. And it just led to then my senior year at ISU, one of the full-time writers left, and Jim said, would you be interested in taking his place? I said, yeah. So my last semester at ISU, I was full-time student and full-time sports writer, so that kind of busy. But yeah, that's kind of how it happened. It was all because, and I guess the only lesson is take every assignment that you get in college or high school or wherever. Do your best on it, because you never know what it's going to lead to. And it's certainly opened a lot of doors for me. And I don't even remember what those assignments were, but I must have done well enough that he thought. And so that was my big break, I guess you would say.
Right, yeah. So 22 years old, approximately, working full time at the Pantagraph as a sports writer. That's what you were doing?
Yeah.
Was it weird at all being so young, going back to these high schools and stuff, and only having a few years between you and the athletes?
It was a little bit, yeah. Because, like, if I would cover an Olympia game, I was interviewing coaches that were coaches when I was there, and in some cases, an athlete who may have been a freshman when I was a senior or whatever. So it was kind of weird in a way, but. That was a good early lesson, though. Like, if I would cover an Olympia game, I had to put that out of my mind, because if I didn't, the story was going to be slanted towards Olympia. I was going to be partial, and I couldn't be partial, and I had to be impartial. So that actually worked in my favor. That is like, okay, even though I'm from here, when I'm covering a game, they're just one of the two teams, and I can't let that enter into it. So I'm glad I started out as young as I did, though, because a lot of times sports writers would have to go to a really small paper to start out, and then work their way up to getting a job at a place. Because at that time, the Pantagraph had a circulation of about 50,000 daily, and which is a good size paper. And
does that mean that the paper went to 50,000 different homes?
Yeah,
that's a lot. Wow.
And, it's nothing like that now, but that. So I was fortunate to be able to start my career at a place where a lot of people have to work their way up to get to that spot. So and I didn't think I'd be there for 42 years, but I loved it, and I loved the community here in the area, and so I just stayed.
Man. So, okay, I'm interested to ask a few things. First, I'll start with this. What is your favorite story that you've covered? And I know you've been there for a long time, but your favorite story that you covered that you think back on, you're like, wow, that was a good one. That's one I can kind of not hang my hat on, because you don't seem like the type of guy to do that, but just one that you look back on favorably.
Boy, there's been a lot of great stories that have presented themselves to me just from being out and about and covering things. And one that comes to mind is one that I just wrote a little over a year ago, I guess. Eric Hubbard was a young, when he was 12 years old, he died of, I believe it was a brain tumor. His dad is Selby Hubbard, there's been a lot of Hubbards that have been through university, high school basketball players. Cal Hubbard was his uncle, and Cal was a Hall of Fame basketball coach at U-High. And two of Eric's brothers, Dan and DJ, were standout basketball players at U-High. But Selby had just put out on Facebook last year and said that they call him E. They refer to Eric as E. He said E would have been 40 today. And that just struck me as, man, here he was 12 years old when he passed away, and now he would be 40. And, you know, what? So I talked to Selby, I talked to the two brothers, and they just really were great about talking about all the kind of the steps of grieving that they went through when he died, and kind of what kind of kid he was, and what kind of a 40-year-old he would be if he was still around. And it just was very impactful, and they talked about how when he was really ailing at the end, U-High's basketball team made it to the state tournament, 1992, I think it was, and they gave Eric a jersey, and it just happened to be the number 2. And they said even today, there's so many times that they will look at a scoreboard and there'll be 2:22 left in the quarter, or it's 22-22 the score, or, you know, that 2 seems to pop up. Selby became the Metcalf junior high basketball coach a couple of years ago. He said the first day that I opened up the box with the uniforms in it, the first jersey staring back at me was number 2.
Wow.
He said there's just so many things. And Dan Hubbard has a son who attends Metcalf, and he said one day, bringing him home from school, his son said, "Yeah, I just kind of had a rough day," and so I went over and I sat by the tree for a little while. Well, this was a tree that had been planted at Metcalf in Eric Hubbard's memory, and Dan was a grade school kid when the tree was planted, and now his son was taking solace in being able to go to by Eric Hubbard's tree on a rough day. And it just, things like that really tugged at the heart. And I just I told the story, but they really told it kind of through me. And it was, so that one really sticks out. Maybe it's because it was fairly recent, but there's been a lot. One of the earliest ones was, Chuck French was a standout football player at Olympia back in the late 80s, early 90s, and died of leukemia while he was still in college. And so I did one on him, and talking to his dad and some of his former teammates and coaches, it really tugged at the heart. And that was actually the first thing I wrote that I ever got any kind of an award for, and I felt if I get an award for something like that, I feel kind of strange, because it was such a sad thing that happened, you know, and it's like I'm benefiting from that in some way. But I was glad that I was able to tell that story too. It came at a time when my own grandfather was 89 years old and was dying of lung cancer, and I was kind of able to compare the two things. You know, here my grandfather, it's a really sad thing that he's had an opportunity to live a full life. Chuck French was 20 years old, and his life got cut short, you know, and so neither one of them is a pleasant thought, but it's really tough when somebody that young goes. So that's another one that kind of sticks out in my mind.
But you said, and I can't blame you for feeling a little funny for benefiting, getting an award for writing about something so sad. But really, when you think about it, the story is about the memory of this person. And so when you receive the award is effectively going to the memory of that person.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
and
true.
so I would have assumed that the family really was happy for you in receiving that award.
They were very good, and the dad kept in contact with me, you know, even long after the story had run. Yeah, it's a great thing. I mean, I guess I really treasure being able to kind of feel what they're feeling and be able to get that across to people who are reading it. That's really my job, I think, is to accurately portray what they're feeling. And if I can do that, why it's been a success.
Man, that's wonderful. I love how deep you take this. Like it's so obvious that you're passionate about it. You ever written a book before?
You know, I've had people ask me that, and maybe I need to. I haven't. I've not written a book, and I don't know. I guess it would be, and there would be definitely be a sports element to it, but like I said, it's more what motivates me is in writing stuff is people, and so it wouldn't necessarily have to be just strictly a sports book, I guess. So maybe that should be my New Year's resolution: figure out what the best book to write would be, and then write it.
Yeah, I think you should think about that. That'd be very interesting, and I promise you, I would read it and have you back on.
But
while I'm asking you these questions, who's the best? Here's a big one. Who's the best athlete that you've covered in your time at the Pantagraph from this area?
From this area,
any sport doesn't matter. Best overall athlete.
I think it might have been Ron Curry, who was a basketball player at Bloomington in the. He went to Normal Community for 2 years, and he transferred to Bloomington for his last 2, and it was in the late '80s. He got a scholarship to Arizona, and played at Arizona for 2 years, I believe it was, and then transferred to Marquette, finished out his career at Marquette, went on to play professionally in Europe for at least 10 years. But the thing about, he was so athletic, and he was 6'8", could run like the wind, could jump. They had a set play off the opening tip where he would get the tip and then he would come around. They had a guard. He would throw an alley-oop. So that a lot of games they would start with an alley-oop dunk from Ron Curry, and that was at Bloomington. And he was just a phenomenal athlete. And he was at that time, he was pretty quiet, very humble, and he always remained humble, I think. But tragically, he came back. I think it was 2015, roughly. They had a night kind of celebrating his career. He came back for that. He posed for photos with people. He had a very good visit, I think, because he still has relatives in Bloomington. Well, then a year or two later, he died, and he was in his late 40s, and so that was a sad postscript to his life. He had been and he was, he had a wife and 4 daughters he was very proud of, and so that kind of ended tragically. But he, just from an pure athletic standpoint, he might be the most gifted athlete I can recall covering.
Yeah, I think, well earned. 6'8", playing professional ball in Europe. That's crazy.
And at Arizona, when he got that full scholarship to Arizona. Arizona was and still is a top-notch program, and so that was pretty big stuff when he signed with Arizona.
Mm-hmm. And just curious, how did he die? I hope doesn't tarnish his name or
it's
anything.
kind of there might be people out there who know for sure, but it's kind of a mystery. I had heard that he had been diagnosed with a terminal disease and decided to take his life. I don't know if that's what happened. So there's some kind of some mystery surrounding that. But no matter how it happened, it was tragic for sure.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And I hate to be cheap like this, but who do you think's, I just want to know, second? Who's second?
Well, let's see.
Because there's been tons of great athletes in this
There's been so
area.
many that have been terrific. There was a Bloomington football player, Dwayne Ware, who went on and played 4 years at Michigan. That's a pretty big deal. He was a running back and defensive back at Bloomington. He turned out to be a defensive back at Michigan. He comes to mind. A little bit before my time was Mike Wells, who was at Normal Community. He could have gone professional in baseball, but he went to Illinois for football instead, was Illinois' starting quarterback in the early 70s. He was a terrific all-around athlete. Billy Dicken, who was at Bloomington, ended up being an all-Big Ten quarterback at Purdue. And he was another three-sport guy who was drafted for baseball, decided not to go, and went to Purdue for football instead, and kind of struggled the first few years, got injured and this and that. Well, his senior year was the all-Big Ten quarterback. So, I mean, that's another guy that kind of stands out. And I don't know, there's just been that we've really been blessed with how many outstanding athletes we get to deal with on a regular basis, not only in Bloomington Normal, but this whole area. And also there have been a lot of really good coaches who have been really good to me over the years, and I appreciate that too. But I guess I should have been more prepared for.
I didn't plan on asking for more people.
But those two, those two kind of stand out. Just trying to think of anybody else that.
Let me ask one more, just to please the people here, because they're going to say something if I don't. Best female athlete.
That was probably Ashley Pistorius. She went to U-High, graduated in 2004, went on to Texas. She was a all-state basketball and soccer player. Set the state record for soccer goals as a senior at U-High. Went to Texas A&M to play both sports. She played basketball for a year or two, but she stayed with soccer. And her senior year, she was one of 3 finalists for the Hondo Award, which is basically soccer's version of the Heisman. Mm-hmm. That's how good she was. And she was just so gifted, and but yet was a team player. Never thought she was, everything should revolve around her. She was just an outstanding player who, in basketball and soccer, U-High ended up going to state tournaments because she was kind of leading the way. So she's probably the best. I mean, she was just, and it was ironic because my oldest daughter graduated from Normal Community in 2004. So coming up through the ranks in basketball, her team would always have to face Ashley, and in junior high it was Parkside. My daughter was at Chittix. She was at Parkside. And it was like playing against Michael Jordan. I mean, she just could do things that nobody else could do, and make them look really easy. And so my daughter developed a great deal of respect for her, not only for how good she was, but how she kind of presented herself. And
just like ultra confident.
Yeah, she was just the real deal, and everybody could tell from from real early on that she was something special.
Man, I really hope she watches this. And it's interesting you say she graduated in like '04 because, I mean, U-High had a phenomenal soccer athlete male in Chase Hilgenbrink, if you remember him.
Yeah, he ended up... and
I've had him on the show talking about the priesthood, actually. But.
he ended up playing professionally and had a really, really great career. Jeremy Stanton was another terrific two-sport guy at U-High. He was an all-stater in basketball and soccer. He went to Evansville and played basketball and had a really nice basketball career there. He's now the boys soccer coach at U-High. So he's kind of given back to the program now. But, he was another one that made everything he did look pretty easy. I couldn't identify athletically with those kind of guys.
Yeah. Well, how do you think the kids, if they've changed, how have they changed? You know, from when you first started, when you were 22 years old, interviewing these high school athletes, have they changed in character and perhaps ability since then? And if so, how so?
I think maybe in ability they've progressed just because there's more ways to develop your talent, I think, these days than there were 45 or 40 years ago. You've got the Sports Enhancement Center here in Bloomington and others like that where you can go and be on a program that helps develop your agility and your strength and all of those kind of things and I know there's quite a few of those even around the area now. So I think they're probably athletes are better. They're probably bigger and stronger and faster maybe than they were on average than they were when I started. In terms of attitude and personality, I don't know. I think they probably are like everybody. They kind of reflect the culture that we live in now, where there's more of a push for immediate satisfaction rather than going through a process to get where you want to go. They want to be starting every game, right now, rather than playing a role and then developing into a starting caliber athlete, whatever sport it is. So I think there's some of that. I think parents are a lot more involved now than they were 40 years ago in terms of, wanting to get their kid a college scholarship for this sport or that sport, or, and that's probably to the detriment a lot of times of the kid themselves. They kind of get put in the middle between the coach and the parent, and which is sad. But that's probably the biggest thing, that there's more of a wanting to have the success right now rather than going through the process of working for it. And then I think it's kind of reflected in the NCAA transfer portal that's going on right now. If someone's at a school and they're not playing as many minutes as they think they should, or they're not getting the ball as often as they should, they just jump in and they transfer somewhere else. It's that it has to happen now. I'm not going to wait. And so that's probably the biggest difference.
Yeah, just a lack of patience. And I don't want to say selfishness, but just, like you said, I want it now. I want my time now. It's my time now.
Yeah, and it's, in a way, I can't blame them for that, because it's kind of the society we're in now is, you want everything to be perfect, and you want it to happen now rather than later. And so they kind of reflect what's going on in a lot of areas, I think.
Have you ever had parents or coaches or anyone get mad at you about how you've covered an event or an athlete?
Yeah, from time to time I have. And most of the time I found that if I could just talk to them rather than, first it was you might get an anonymous letter from them where they wouldn't sign it, but they'd just really rip into you, which if I would open a letter, and if there wasn't any signature, I'd almost just throw it away without reading it. But then it became they would send you an email, and most of the time they might sign the email, but and then between those times they would call on the phone, and I just found that rather than talk to them on the phone or in an email or whatever, if I could just talk to them face to face, most of the time that diffused it right away. Because I don't know, there's just something about not being face to face where you can really rip into somebody, and then you hear kind of, well, here's why we covered this game instead of that game. And they may not like it, but at least they understand it then. So I have had some of that. I've had a little bit from coaches too, but not too much. I mean, I've always tried to be sensitive to, especially on a high school level, if a player makes a huge error at the end of a baseball game and costs his team the regional title, let's say, many times I would just say that the other team scored the winning run on an error. I wouldn't point out what kid made the error, because they already feel bad enough, so I have seen some other guys on staff who maybe they'll say who dropped a sure touchdown pass, or who who turned the ball over on the last possession of a basketball game and they ended up losing, and they'll say who it was, and then a lot of times they would get some negative feedback on that, not just from parents, but from other people who were like, why are you doing this to a high school kid or whatever? And I would agree that there's a way to tell the story in that situation without further embarrassing a kid that's out there doing his best.
Right. So. Absolutely. And bigger question here. What is the current state of the newspaper industry in general, and what does the future look like?
Well, it's really in bad shape as an industry, especially the print side of it. There's just not near the advertising that there used to be, because not near as many people buy the print edition, so advertisers are not eager to spend those kind of dollars to advertise. So that shrinks the size of the paper, because the size is determined by the advertising revenue. So then you have dwindling revenue, so that means resources get cut. There's fewer and fewer reporters. Right now in the Pantagraph, when I became sports editor in 2012, there was me plus 4 full-time writers, and then we had about 6 or 7 part-time people who would come in on different nights and take games over the phone, do that kind of thing. When I retired in 2020, it was down to, we just had me and 3 other sports writers, and we had no part-timers left. They had all been cut. Now, a year and a half later since I've retired, there are 2 full-time sports writers at the Pantagraph and nothing else. There's no part-timers. So so there's many nights that they're also having to paginate the pages, which we call it. They're dealing with a design center. So they're just stretched way too thin. But that's how it is at every paper anymore. Mm-hmm. I had somebody at the gas station not too long ago say, why would I buy the paper? There's nothing to it. And I said, well, the reason there's nothing to it is because you don't buy the paper anymore. It's hand in hand. I mean, the revenue it's a business like any other, and if you're not getting the revenue, then the product is going to suffer. And like I said, it's not just the Pantagraph; it's everywhere. So I think the future is, and you've seen this more and more, is going to be digital and online. That's where it's going to have to. If it's going to keep going, it's going to have to be there. The problem with that is, from the get-go, the early origins of the internet, newspapers didn't really figure out how to make money online. The advertisers weren't eager to jump in, and for a long time, newspapers didn't charge a subscription to access the website, so people got it for free for so many years. And now all the papers want you to pay to see their content, but it's a lot of people are used to, they'll say, well, we got it for free all this time, why should we pay for, so
right.
It's a tough time. It's a great business, and I'm really hoping something can be figured out so it's sustained for the long haul. I don't think the print side, I don't see any way that's going to survive in the long term. So there's already some papers who have eliminated like their Monday edition or or maybe they just publish 3 or 4 days a week instead of every day, and so that's sad to see. But I'm hopeful that there's something that can be done to revitalize it. I think it's such an important industry for, like on the news side, for keeping government honest and keeping it's kind of the watchdog for what's going on in communities and stuff. And if the newspapers go away, it's one of those things. One of my colleagues used to always say that I don't think people realize what they have, and they won't realize it until it's gone. And then if it's gone, it's really going to hit. And so hopefully it won't go away. Hopefully they can figure out a way to make it viable.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in this area, the Pantagraph is the voice of the people and the voice for the people. It's incredibly important, and I really have a lot of hope that if the heads of the Pantagraph are flexible, are open-minded, make intelligent decisions, and just learn what's going on in this day and age, I mean, they could absolutely continue to thrive. They won't print. There's no chance that printing is in the future. No one's picking up pieces of paper.
Yeah.
People are looking at screens far more than they're looking at paper. Even for books, people are looking at screens and listening to things.
Yeah.
I firmly believe if you have the right coders, and look, there's plenty of incredible coders and computer people at ISU. That's why Rivian is even here, because they see all the potential with these students and the class or the level of education they're getting, who the professors are and everything like that. I firmly believe that if they got the right coders to design the website in the right way, and they marketed the subscription thing in the right way, you read half of an article, and then if you want to continue reading this article, $3.99 a month. I think right now it's $4.99 or some for 3 months. I don't know exactly. Yeah. But it's incredibly difficult, and it takes a lot of research to convert your former subscribers who are probably, the older people were probably paying by physical check.
Yeah.
To get them to start paying online.
Yeah.
Half of them don't trust online payments in general.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, my dad included. I'm like, Dad, it's safe. I promise you. He did eventually get an online subscription to the Pantagraph. Yeah. But oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's
so
tough
interesting
to change people's habits. It's really difficult to do that.
It's maddening.
Yeah. But I remain hopeful. I don't know what exactly where the future's going with it, but it just makes me appreciate that I'm glad I was in it during the era I was in it, and because for such a long time, during the time I was there, newspapers were really thriving, and they mattered, and I think they should still matter. And it's just figuring out, how to make them exist for the long haul.
Man, I mean, you were a part of the glory days of the Pantagraph. At least maybe the glory days are yet to come, but it won't be in print. But as far as the print days, you were a part of and contributed to the glory days. And I have, I don't know if I'll take it out, but I mean, I remember this is 9/11 from the Pantagraph.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was crazy. Everyone knew about this picture on the cover of the Pantagraph in 2001.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible stuff. And like you said, people won't know how important newspaper is and was until it's gone. And all of a sudden, there's no main trustworthy local voice.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I've got two grandsons. One's 3 years old and one's about 8 months. And I envision this day down the line where they'll say, well, what did you do for a living? And I'll say, well, I wrote for the newspaper. And they'll say, well, what's a newspaper? You know, and I think that'd be pretty sad if that's the way the conversation goes. But you know, and that's just the way it's kind of gone. And there's been so many great things evolved because of the internet and the digital and everything else. But it's kind of meant the death of the print side. And so for those of us who were in it when we knew that the print side was pretty good stuff, that's kind of hard to take. But we're gonna have to figure it out.
Right, absolutely. I'm hopeful for the future of the Pantagraph, although I don't think it'll be a newspaper. It'll be a news something online probably. Yeah. But again, I'm hopeful, and we're getting towards the end of this thing right now, and I want to ask a few wrap-up questions about you as a person. And something I read in my research, you've been described by coworkers as, quote, the most inspiring and compassionate leader one could follow. What was it about your team that brought out the best in you that would lead someone to say something like that, do you think?
Well, I think I worked with a lot of the same people for so many years before I actually became sports editor in 2012. So we had such a strong bond that even though I had to make the decisions now and all this stuff, I never felt like we got away from being friends and colleagues. And I think it's important that that you be in the trenches alongside with the people that are working. I mean, it's still awkward for me to say that they were working for me, because for so many years we just worked with each other and we were a great team. And but after I became sports editor, I didn't. It wasn't like I started taking weekends off, or I had, I mean, I was still right there with them the whole time, and I think that is a big part of if you're there and you're making the tough decisions and you're battling deadline right along with them and everything else. They kind of see that, and I've even had a couple of them tell me that they were like, well, there were times where I was worn out and I just wanted to walk out, but I saw you were still there, and so I just kept, and so that's probably I found the biggest part of being a leader is just being there, and I don't say that you can still be one of the guys, because there's still occasionally decisions you have to make that might not be exactly what they would hope for or whatever. But if you're there and you're working right alongside them and chasing the same goal and having fun while you're doing it, that's what I think leads them to feel that way. And no matter how crazy things got, I still tried to maintain my sense of humor, and occasionally it'd be just things would be flying at you, and you just have to kind of take a second and just laugh, because where do we start? What do we attack first here? But so I was very appreciative when they said things like that, because I felt strongly about them, and it's nice to know they felt the same way about me.
And I think that's a great piece of advice there, not to harp on one small part of what you just said, but the humor amidst adversity is incredibly powerful. I mean, if you can get people to laugh neurologically, literally you're releasing endorphins in your brain. You see it all the time in the Navy SEALs. They've done studies on it where, they are just suffering all together. They're carrying the boat, and on the beach, and one guy cracks a joke, and all of a sudden they have they're given new life. So good thing to remember when you're a boss is to have humor amidst the chaos.
That's right. Yeah, because there's gonna be some rough times, but if you can all kind of laugh at it together, it makes it easier.
Right. So, real quick, I just want to make sure I understand. You were at the Pantagraph for 42 years. You were a writer for about 30 years, and then for the last decade or so of your time there, you were the editor through whom all the writers' articles flow, and you have to make sure they're good and things like that.
The last 8 to 10 years, as editor, I would make out a weekly schedule, and it had room for guys to. But as far as games that we needed to cover, this and that, I would make out those kind of assignments and make out photo assignments to tell the photographers which games we need to go to, that kind of thing. I would read their stories once they turned them in. Although on a busy night where we're pushing deadline, a lot of times, if I'm done with my story and this guy's done with his, we would just swap and read each other's before it got, sent to print. So it wasn't because sometimes whatever I was covering was right on deadline, so I didn't have time to read everyone else's story before they got in, but we made sure that another full-time writer read each other's stories. But I was in charge of, when it wasn't a deadline issue, I was in charge of reading those stories, many times putting a suggested headline on them. And then I was still covering as many games as ever and writing columns and because I didn't want to give up the writing part. The job would have been easier if I'd have just said, well, I'm not going to write anymore. I'm just going to focus on this nuts and bolts stuff. But I didn't want to. The writing was the part I enjoyed, so I kept writing as much as I ever did, and then I had the other. So it was a lot on my plate. It probably led me to retire a little sooner than I would have if it hadn't been so hectic. But I found that I enjoyed. I kind of enjoyed the process of making an assignment and seeing it executed, and then if it turned out really nice in the paper, it's like, well, that's kind of a small victory every time. So.
Yeah, I'm not surprised it made you retire sooner, though, because you didn't take on a different role entirely. You took on an additional role.
Yeah, I kind of was doing two jobs, basically. And the sports editor job had come open in 2007, and I had considered it, but at that time, the management crew, they wanted somebody just to be the sports editor and not write anymore, or not, just basically manage the department. And I didn't really want to do that. So they brought in Mike Eganis, who was sports editor for 5 years. He did a terrific job. He was very organized. But he left in 2012 to take a job at State Farm. So that's when it came open that time, I talked to him again, and they said, well, if you want to keep writing, we'd be open to that. So that's what made me decide to dive in and do both jobs, basically. So, but I'm glad I did it. I mean, I think if I had never done it, if I had never been sports editor, I would have always kind of wondered, well, what would that have been like, when I was done. But so now I know, and I know it's not easy, and I know I prefer my role now where I write 2 columns a week and then I do whatever else I want to do.
I've heard that back in the day when you were covering sports, you would have to literally go to the field, do the interviews, take the pictures, run back to the physical building because you didn't have laptops or anything.
That's right.
You'd have to type it up and then pray to God that you could send it to the printer, who I believe was still Mike Plusha, who I know personally.
He was one of those, yeah.
And he would have to print it before 10 p.m. or something like that.
Yeah, it was crazy.
To get it out the next morning.
Yeah.
This is nuts.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's come a long way in the technology end of it. I mean, now you're at a game and you get done, you push a button and it's emailed right into. Well,
right.
Actually now they've got laptops where you put it right into, you type it right into TCMS, we call it, a system. Somebody can, as soon as you're done with it, you let them know. Somebody reads it, they ship it right on, and it's, the process is pretty efficient and pretty painless now. But on the flip side of that, because we don't have our own press, we and many other Central Illinois papers get printed in Peoria. So our deadlines are kept getting earlier and earlier for the print edition. So like now, I believe they have to have all their stuff done and pages all done by like 9:00 at night. So, sports, many times games aren't even over at that point. So
right.
It's meant a drastic reduction in the number of games you can get in. And that's another thing working against the print side. I mean, that's another reason it's going to go away sometime.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because Mike still has a job there
doing
that. So
yeah, I hope he can hang on a few more years till he wants to retire.
Mm-hmm. And, you worked at the Pantagraph for 42 years. You obviously enjoyed your time there, which means that you had to enjoy the people that you worked with. I was wondering if you could just real quick give a shout out to some of your closest colleagues.
Yeah,
maybe you will watch this.
The three that I worked the longest with and had the greatest connection with are Jim Benson, Randy Reinhardt, and Randy Scherer. We worked together over 30 years as a unit. I mean, we had other people come and go with us, but those three, we went through everything together from the time we were young until we were old and grizzled, and it's that connection, and that's where a lot of the fun came in. We all have pretty good senses of humor, and so we could make each other laugh whenever, like you talked about earlier, when things were really tough and you're grinding and everything else, and then all of a sudden you're laughing about something, and I'm still close with those guys. In the summer, Jim's a golfer, and I have never really been a golfer, but now, at least once a week in the summer, I go out and golf with him. He shoots, in the 80s, and I shoot in the 100s. But we have a good time, and so yeah, those three in particular. Joe Deacon is another one. Joe was originally a copy editor in sports. Then he went to the online, back when the Pantagraph had a specific designated online department. He went to that. Well, then about my last 10 to 12 years, I guess it would have been, he was in the sports department with us, and was assistant sports editor. So he's another one that I had a really good relationship with and still do. Back before that, Brian Bloodworth was a co-worker, and then he became sports editor for 18 years, so I worked under him. We're still good friends, and Mark Lewis was a sports writer back when I first started. Bill Flick even was a sports writer when I first got there. Then he progressed into doing columns for the features department at the time. So yeah, I've made a lot of great friends there. Like I mentioned, Mike Aganis, he was terrific when he was there. So those are some of the people that really stand out in my mind.
Man, yeah, a lot of great people you've worked with over this time. And I mean, Randy, you're a legend, man. I thank you for the amazing sports coverage that you've done over the years, and I thank you for talking with me today. It's been extremely enjoyable and insightful, so thank you very much for your time and what you've done.
Well, I appreciate it, and I should mention that I worked with your dad at the Pantagraph, Ernie, and Mike Plesha also. I'm very close with him, and so it's been a wonderful life and way to make a living for me, and I'm glad that I appreciate you having me on to kind of talk about some of those fond memories.
Oh, absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for watching that episode of The Paul Garcia Show. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, and share this episode on Facebook and with your friends. If you'd like to support the show, consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/Paul Garcia, where you can sign up to give $1 or more each month, and you will get early access to each and every episode, and your name will gracefully travel across the bottom of the screen in the beginning of every episode, so everyone will know that you're an amazing person. If you're not about the monthly support, consider making a one-time donation on Venmo to username The Paul Garcia Show. Another great and free way to support this show is to subscribe on YouTube. Once the channel hits 1,000 subscribers, some amazing things will happen, but I need your help for that. Also, I invite you to follow my page on Instagram, like my page on Facebook, and leave a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or even Google Reviews. This all helps a lot and is very much appreciated. Lastly, thank you for listening and watching, and God bless and have a great week.